Hello Year 9, welcome to the next lesson looking at this question: how had the Allied powers defeated the Axis powers by 1945? Today this is our title: how did the Allies progress towards Berlin? We're going to continue this next week, but for now write down these key words. So the first one is to besiege. We might have talked about this earlier when we talked about perhaps sieges of castles in the medieval period, but this is something we surround and attack somewhere over a long period of time. A counter-offensive, again, you might have heard of this in sport, where you come against. So counteracting is where you're pushing back, attacking the enemy after being attacked. And to liberate, to set an area, a country or a group of people free. So there's a country in Africa called Liberia, which is the same root word, and it is a country which was set up by freed slaves. So those are our three words. Write those down with the definitions. Well done. Okay, choose the best answer from these phrases in italics. So for example, artillery means, and then choose one of those three phrases: either guns which can fire shells, an attack at night, or guns on planes. Do that for these 6 sentences. Okay, this lesson then we're going to look at the timeline of the Allied invasion, and we're going to start with the D-Day landings that you looked at last week. So we know that American, Canadian and British troops landed on the 6th of June 1944. By August, so it took quite a long time, you can see the beginning of June to almost the end of August, so June, July and most of August, the Allies come down from the coast of France and reach Paris and force the Nazis out. In September, they launched this operation, which is one of the things we're going to look at today, called Operation Market Garden, and that is in Holland. So that's giving away part of what we're doing today. Just a few days later, that fails. In December, so in the winter, the Germans launch a counter-attack. They are pushing back the Allies. Rather than the Allies pushing into Germany, the Germans are pushing back, so that's a counter-attack. The Americans are a key part of this, and they are surrounded, besieged by the Germans, and they refuse to surrender. And so in the end, the Allies win that battle and move on. So that's kind of given the story away of this lesson. So that's where we're going to see what happens is in this part of the story. Okay. Looking at this map, then you can see in the top corner, you can see the D-Day landings, and you can see them again on the bigger map. And even though there was quite a high cost, lots of men died, they managed to hold on to the beaches once they'd landed. And they now needed to head across Europe, over the River Rhine, which you can see right on the far right hand side of this map here. This is the River Rhine here. So, and after that, once they've crossed the river, they're in Germany. And they hoped that it was going to be quick and that it wouldn't be too difficult. They had some choices then about where to attack. They need to move into Germany. Would you go into this part north of I think this is the wrong way around. So this is through central Belgium. This is straight through the Siegfried line. You can see that was a defensive line that the Germans had strengthened. Or would you go round the top through Holland? So have a think about which one you would do and why. Remember, you're trying to get to Germany. You're trying to get into the main part of Germany, which is here. So have a think about which way you might go. So write down which area to attack first as a subheading, write down your choice and then explain why. Okay, so to big reveal, this was a British plan. The British said, let's go north to Arnhem, so that option. Eisenhower said we should attack all of those ways, but Montgomery, the British general, said that it would be quicker to try and go round the top and focus on Arnhem in the north. So you can see there the British army down in the south, they're going to come round, and then they thought this was the best way to get into Germany. So let's see what happens. was called Operation Market Garden. There are in fact 2 bits, you can read about them here. So on the September the 17th, 1944, 3 Allied divisions, 1 British, 2 American, were dropped by parachute into Holland to seize the bridges near Arnhem that led towards Germany. So this part is dropping men in, dropping soldiers in, and this is called Operation Market. And then there would be some ground troops that are coming up the road that you can see here, this way, to support them. And so these would be British and American forces that would support them, and then all together then they would move from here where they'd taken the land, and they'd come down into the main part of Germany. So that was the garden part because it was on the ground. Let's see what happens. Here's the parachutists, and here are the troops on the ground. We know that this failed, and here are 5 reasons why. You can see these pictures that I've put in. So the first reason are these chameleons over here. You can see this chameleon is really stretching because he is too far away, and so the first reason is that this didn't work, is that they landed too far away from Arnhem. They were 80 miles away from the main bridges, and lots of men who were dropping down were attacked by the Germans. It also took too long to get the men there, to get the soldiers there. So rather than being dropped all at once and being a really strong force, they were dropped bits and pieces over a few days, and so it took too long. The weather conditions were poor, so it was hard for them to hold on to the bridges, and because it was really woody, really thick trees, radios didn't work very well. This bottom picture shows a narrow road, and this was a big problem because the 2 vehicles could only go next to each other. It wasn't really wide, so lots of tanks could come down at the same time, and so the Germans could pick them off easily, and they were still a long way away from Arnhem when they were meant to be there and fighting. And lastly, this top picture is a German Panzer tank, and these were there, and they besieged the British, so they were not able to fight back against these very strong German tanks. So it was a bit of a disaster. And in the end, they got round the top of that river, but almost 8,000 were killed. And so you can see there are very few of them who actually survived the mission, and the Germans lost far fewer men. So this plan of Montgomery's didn't work out. This was not going to be a quick way to end a quick war. Okay, pause the video, and using what we've done so far, complete these sentences. If you need to scroll back through the video to find them, then you can do that. Pause the video while you answer these. Okay, let's have a go at explaining why Market Garden failed. So using the 5 pictures, or the 5 reasons that I showed you, remember the chameleons, the timer, the cloudy skies over the trees, the big tank, and the narrow road. See if pick one of those and support it with some details from your knowledge. There's some useful words or phrases that you can use there. So again, pause the video or maybe go back if you need to. Okay, so that had been an Allied attack trying to get into Nazi Germany. The Germans then decided to push back. So this is in December, and you can see here it's known as the Battle of the Bulge because it's bulging outwards. So normally the line was like this, but suddenly it bulges up like this because the Germans are pushing the Allies back. And you can see on the map here that this area is still green. So the green land is held by the Allies, and the red land was the Germans, and you can see the big arrow pushing this way as the German advance. But this little bit of land here around the town of Bastogne was held by, even when that front line moved back, they kept that kind of pocket of land, and it was besieged. So the Germans are surrounding those American troops who were there. Let's see what happens. So the Americans are there. The Germans are very, very busy trying to attack them, and so the Allies keep sending in reinforcements by plane, and the Americans, even though the weather was cold, you can see it's really snowy in that photograph there from the siege, they could see clearly where the Germans were, and by the end of December, the Germans had run out of fuel for the tanks and their vehicles, and so they started really well. They'd done this big push to make that line bulge out, but actually by the end of December they were a bit stuck. The Germans couldn't keep fighting. So they lost over 12,000 men this time. Loads of tanks they had to just abandon because they didn't have any fuel for them. And even though they'd slowed down that Allied advance to get through the Siegfried line, they had less equipment, lots of men had died, and so it was much harder. Hitler knew how important this was, and he sent reinforcements and he told them keep attacking, but the soldiers knew they were defeated. So in the end the Allies won that battle, and that is when they really begin to be able to push in across some of these areas because the Germans couldn't keep them back. This historian here, you can't see very well because my video is in the way, is called Max Hastings, and he wrote a book about the battle for Germany in these years, and he says the principal beneficiaries of the Bulge battle were the Russians. The German army had lost a great deal of resources in weeks that might have taken months had they been employed in defence. So that's his interpretation. That means that's his explanation for why this happened and how important it was. He says in that first sentence that the Russians were the people who benefited or gained the most from the events in the Battle of the Bulge. Now, we know that the Russians were not fighting in this battle. The Russians are nowhere near this. So why is he saying that? Let's have a look. He says he supports this by saying that the Germans lost loads of resources fighting the Americans here, which could have been used to defend against attacks from the Russians in the east. So remember when we looked at the Operation Barbarossa, when the Nazis invaded, remember that failed, that came to an end, and the Russians now are pushing back towards back west, threatening Germany on its eastern front. And so this is really helpful for the Russians because now the Germans have got fewer soldiers and fewer tanks to use when they're fighting them over in the east. So now you've understood what Max Hastings has said, can you explain how important the Battle of the Bulge was in your own words? So pause the video, use the interpretation and what we've just explained to say, why was this such an important battle for the Allies? Okay, so this is the end of the lesson. What I'd like you to do is write a paragraph to summarise your learning from this lesson about these events after the D-Day landings. And I've given you 3 sentences here. They're all pretty good. You could use all of them, but some of them might be better than others. So A says the advance after D-Day was fast and very successful. You might think that's true. You might want to choose B, the Allied advance after D-Day had many setbacks. So it wasn't going forward all the time and it was quite slow. The Allied advance after D-Day was a disaster and the German army almost stopped them. You might think that's a better way of explaining or telling the story of what we've learnt about this lesson. So have a go at choosing one of those and then writing your own interpretation or explanation of these events that we've just looked at. And as a challenge, if you haven't done enough and you'd like to know more about these events, there's lots and lots more to find out about. So Operation Market Garden or the Battle of the Bulge. Or you might want to find out, have a sneak preview into next week to find out what happened between January and April 1945 that eventually led to the end of this very long war. Well done. Last thing then is to open up the separate assignment on Teams or use the quiz to check your learning from this lesson. Well done.